You stand in the Athenian Agora, 5 days into the great Dionysia festival of 421 BCE. The air tastes of wine and sweat. Around you, citizens debate democracy with voices hoarse from cheering at yesterday's theatrical performances. Sophocles has just premiered a new tragedy about justice and human dignity. The applause still echoes off marble columns. But if you turn your head just slightly to the left, past the statue of Athena, you'll see something the philosophers never mentioned in their dialogues. A line of girls, none older than 15, being led into a building marked with the symbol of Dionysus. They wear no chains. They don't need them. The brands on their left thighs, still healing, tell you everything about where they're going and why they cannot refuse. If you're fascinated by the buried contradictions of ancient civilizations, take a moment to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's incredible how people from every corner of the world can gather here to confront the uncomfortable truths our history books tried to bury. This is the story classical scholars spent centuries avoiding, not because the evidence was missing, but because it revealed something unbearable, that the civilization which gave us philosophy, democracy, and dramatic art simultaneously engineered the most sophisticated system of ritualized sexual exploitation in the ancient Mediterranean. The same city that carved "Know Thyself" above Apollo's temple operated facilities where human beings were legally transformed into sacred instruments of fertility worship, where religious duty and sexual violence became indistinguishable, where the state collected taxes on suffering and called it piety. The horror wasn't hidden in shadows. It was written into law, blessed by priests, and defended by the same thinkers we still study as founders of Western ethics. To understand what happened in Athens between the 6th and 4th centuries BCE, we must examine not the monuments that survived, but the bodies that didn't, the women whose suffering financed the Parthenon, the girls whose screams were drowned out by philosophical debates about virtue, the countless victims whose names were deliberately erased so that Athens could be remembered only for its glory. The system did not emerge from chaos. It was designed with the same precision Greeks applied to geometry and architecture. When Solon implemented his democratic reforms in 594 BCE, he abolished debt slavery for Athenian citizens, a measure historians celebrate as enlightened. But the same reforms codified something darker, a legal framework that divided humanity into those who possessed rights and those who existed only to serve. The legislation made no mention of morality. It concerned itself purely with categories: citizen and non-citizen, free and enslaved, human and property. Within this framework, a specialized trade developed around the bodies of foreign-born and enslaved women. But unlike agricultural or domestic slavery, which historians have documented extensively, this system served a dual purpose that made it uniquely disturbing. It was simultaneously economic, generating substantial revenue for the city-state, and religious, integrated into fertility cults and festivals honoring Dionysus and Aphrodite. Archaeological evidence from the Kerameikos district, combined with fragments from Athenian tax records preserved on ostraca and papyri, reveals that by the height of Athens' golden age under Pericles, this trade wasn't peripheral. It was foundational. The earliest references appear in the comedies of Aristophanes and the speeches of orators like Demosthenes, who mentioned the system casually as one might reference any regulated industry. They spoke of ergasteria, specialized establishments licensed by the state. They mentioned the pornai, the enslaved women who worked in them, distinguished legally from the hetaerai, educated courtesans who enjoyed slightly more autonomy. But most tellingly they referenced the astynomos, civic officials whose job included inspecting these women to ensure they remained fit for use. This wasn't underground exploitation. This was civic infrastructure. The system's scale becomes clear when we examine the port of Piraeus, Athens, commercial gateway. Excavations in the 1960s and 70s uncovered remains of more than 40 structures matching descriptions of brothels in ancient sources. Ceramics found at these sites bear pricing marks, standardized symbols indicating the cost of different services. But more disturbing were the scattered fragments of ankle shackles, wrist restraints, and iron brands, recovered from the same layers as theatrical masks and philosophical texts. Beauty and brutality, quite literally, buried together. By the 5th century BCE, Athens had refined this exploitation into a taxonomy. 3 distinct categories organized the system, each serving different economic tiers. The dicteriades worked in elite symposia, expected to perform music, engage in intellectual conversation, and provide sexual services to aristocrats. They commanded prices equivalent to a week's wages for a skilled craftsman. The Chemeteb Pi operated in mid-tier brothels near the Agora and harbor, serving merchants and middling citizens at moderate cost. And at the bottom, the pornai of the Keramakos serviced laborers, foreign workers, and slaves themselves, often for the price of an obol, 1/6 of a drachma less than a loaf of bread. But price alone doesn't capture the true architecture of this system. What made it uniquely efficient was how thoroughly it was integrated into civic life. The state required licenses for brothels, inspected them regularly, and collected a pornikon telos, a prostitution tax, on every transaction. These revenues accounting for an estimated 15 to 20% of Athens' public income, funded the very institutions we associate with Greek enlightenment. The renovation of temples, the staging of dramatic festivals, even the stipends paid to citizens for attending the assembly. Democracy quite literally ran on extracted suffering. They could not look away. Citizens walked past these establishments daily, sometimes multiple times as they moved between political and commercial spaces. The largest brothels clustered deliberately around the Agora, positioned so that a man could vote on legislation in the morning, debate philosophy in the afternoon, and purchase a human being by evening. Geography itself eliminated any pretense of separation between civic virtue and systematic abuse. Entry into this system followed pathways Greeks documented with bureaucratic precision. The majority of women arrived as war captives, absorbed during Athens' constant military campaigns against neighboring city-states and Persian territories. After each victory, the assembly decided the fate of conquered populations. Men were typically executed or enslaved for labor. Women of childbearing age were distributed as spoils or sold at public auction. Auctioneers examined them as livestock, checking teeth, hair, and skin for signs of disease. Those deemed attractive were reserved for the sexual trade. Others were assigned to domestic service or mining operations. A second pathway involved debt and poverty. Families from Athens' tributary states, crushed by imperial taxation, sometimes sold daughters to prevent starvation. While Solon's reforms prohibited the sale of Athenian citizens, No such protection extended to foreign-born residents or the children of non-citizen mothers. Contracts discovered in Egyptian archives dating from Greek settlements show that some sales involved girls as young as 7, purchased explicitly for future use once they reached menarche. The third and most disturbing pathway was reproductive. Women already enslaved in the system gave birth in the same facilities where they worked. Their daughters, born into legal non-existence, inherited their mother's status automatically. No ceremony marked this inheritance, no ritual acknowledged their birth as an event worth recording. They simply appeared in ledgers as future inventory, listed alongside wine amphorae and grain shipments. Once acquired, regardless of pathway, all women underwent the same initiation. They were taken to the ergasteria, where overseers, often free women, hired specifically for this purpose, prepared them. Preparation meant 3 things. First, documentation. Their physical characteristics were recorded, along with any languages they spoke and skills they possessed. Second, pricing. Based on age, appearance, and projected lifespan, they were assigned to one of the 3 economic tiers. Third and most permanent, branding. The process was neither quick nor merciful. A bronze or iron brand, heated until it glowed red, was pressed into the flesh of the left thigh, high enough that no tunic could conceal it when lifted. The brand bore either the owner's mark or a simple symbol indicating their designated use. Medical writers like Hippocrates noted that infections from these brands killed approximately 1 in 10 girls within the first month. For the survivors, the scar served multiple purposes. It prevented escape by making them instantly identifiable. It established legal ownership in disputes, and it psychologically reinforced what they had become. No longer people. Property marked for function. They could not look away. Not just citizens, but the entire economic apparatus of Athens depended on this transformation being complete and visible. Accountants tracked their depreciation over time. Tax collectors calculated revenue based on their estimated years of service. Even physicians studied their bodies not to heal them, but to determine how to maximize their productive lifespan. The most harrowing aspect of this system wasn't its cruelty and isolation, but how it intersected with religious practice. Every spring, Athens celebrated the Great Dionysia, a 6-day festival honoring the god of wine, fertility, and ecstatic release. Modern audiences remember this festival for its theatrical competitions. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides premiered their masterworks here. But the Dionysia was never just about drama. It was about fertility in all its forms, agricultural and human. And fertility rituals in the ancient world often involved what we would now call sexual violence, reframed as divine communion. Contemporary sources, particularly the fragments of Cretinos and Hermippos preserved by later scholars, describe specific ceremonies during the Dionysia, where enslaved women were brought to sanctuaries dedicated to Dionysus and Aphrodite. There they participated in rituals designed to ensure the city's prosperity. Participation, of course, is a euphemism. These women had no choice. Priests selected them based on age and physical condition, then dedicated them to the god for the duration of the festival. The mechanics of these rituals were deliberately obscured in official records, but enough fragments survived to reconstruct their general structure. Women were led to temple precincts in procession, often after theatrical performances, creating a grotesque continuity between artistic celebration and ritual abuse. Inside the sanctuaries, rituals unfolded that participants framed as offerings to the gods, acts meant to transfer fertility from the sacred realm to the human community. In practice, this meant multiple men, often in groups, engaged in sexual acts with the women under religious pretense. Refusal was not merely illegal, it was sacrilege. What made this especially insidious was how seamlessly religious ideology and economic exploitation reinforced each other. The same women who were rented for profit during ordinary days became sacred vessels during festivals. The same acts described as commercial transactions in brothels were reframed as worship in temples. And the same men who participated, whether as paying clients or religious devotees, encountered no cognitive dissonance. The system had provided them with two vocabularies for the same violence, ensuring neither was recognized as such. After the festivals ended, women returned to their brothels, often injured, sometimes pregnant, always expendable. If pregnancy occurred, abortion was standard, performed by physicians using herbal pessaries, sharp instruments, and violent physical manipulation. Medical text described these procedures with clinical detachment, noting success rates and complications without once acknowledging the women as patients rather than property. Survival was not the goal. Restored availability was. They could not look away because the contradiction was everywhere. The same priests who blessed fertility rituals officiated weddings where citizen brides were praised for their purity. The same physicians who performed forced abortions on enslaved women delivered citizen babies with care and ceremony. The same poets who wrote about honor, justice, and the dignity of the human soul attended symposia where enslaved girls served wine, played music, and submitted to whoever paid. Consider the case of one woman whose story survives only because a philosopher mentioned her in passing as an ethical example, though not in the way he intended. Plato, in his dialogue Laws, references a woman named Neaira, though whether this is the same Neaira mentioned in a famous legal speech is debated. What matters is the pattern her life reveals. Neaira was born around 400 BCE, not in Athens but in Corinth, daughter of a woman already enslaved in a brothel. She never knew freedom. By age 12 she had been sold to a brothel keeper named Neaira, who specialized in training young girls for elite clientele. Neaira's establishment operated legally, licensed by Corinth's magistrates, inspected quarterly to ensure compliance with public health standards. The standards, of course, concerned disease control, not human welfare. For 7 years, Neaira worked in this establishment, serving symposia attended by wealthy merchants, military officers, and occasionally philosophers. She learned to play the aloes, memorized poetry, and became fluent in the conversational style elite men preferred. Her beauty and education made her valuable enough that 2 clients eventually pooled resources to purchase her outright, intending to keep her as a private mistress. But then something unexpected happened. The 2 men, both facing financial difficulties, decided to offer Neaira her freedom for a price, 30 minae, roughly 3,000 drachmas, an enormous sum equivalent to several years' income for a skilled craftsman. Neaira, by then in her 20s, managed to raise the money with help from a lover, an Athenian man named Phrynion. She bought her freedom, becoming one of the rare women to escape legal slavery. Yet freedom brought no escape from the system itself. Phrynion, who had helped liberate her, expected exclusive access to her body in return. When she refused, he claimed she still owed him a debt, and therefore remained his property under Athenian law. She fled to Megara, then returned to Athens years later with another man, Stephanos, living as his common-law wife and passing off her children as Athenian citizens. This deception eventually triggered a legal case that revealed everything. In the prosecution speech, delivered by Apollodorus and preserved by later scholars, Neaira's entire history was laid bare. The orator described her brands, her sales, her years in the brothels, using her past to argue that her children could not possibly be legitimate citizens. The speech contains no sympathy. It treats her life as evidence of pollution, her body as proof of unworthiness. What's most telling is what the speech assumes. The orator never suggests that what happened to Neaira was unjust. He never questions the system that branded her at 12 or the laws that made her purchasable. His only concern is that she might contaminate citizenship by pretending to be what she can never be, a woman whose body belongs to herself. The jury agreed. Neaira was stripped of her precarious status. Her children declared illegitimate, and she disappeared from the historical record. They could not look away from cases like Neaira's because they were everywhere, woven into the legal and social fabric of the city. Every lawsuit involving inheritance, citizenship, or sexual propriety required courts to determine which women's bodies were protected by law and which existed outside it. Every determination reinforced the same principle. Some humans are ends in themselves, others are means to ends. The consequences of this system extended far beyond individual suffering. It shaped Athenian philosophy in ways scholars are only beginning to acknowledge. When Aristotle argued in his Politics that some people are slaves by nature, suited by their constitution for obedience rather than self-governance, he wasn't making an abstract claim. He was rationalizing what he saw every day in the streets of Athens. When he distinguished between wives whose purpose was producing legitimate heirs and sexual slaves whose purpose was providing pleasure without consequence, he was describing existing social categories, then arguing backward to make them seem inevitable. Plato's famous proposal in the Republic to abolish private families among the guardian class was partly motivated by what he witnessed, how sexual possession of women created conflicts among men and distracted them from philosophical pursuits. His solution wasn't to grant women autonomy, but to make them communal property of the guardian class, eliminating jealousy by eliminating individual ownership. The logic was the same. Women were problems to be solved through proper distribution, not people whose freedom might matter. Even Socrates, remembered for his relentless questioning of conventional wisdom, apparently never questioned this. In Xenophon's Memorabilia, Socrates visits a courtesan named Theodote and discusses with her the art of attracting lovers. The dialogue is playful, even respectful, but it never acknowledges the coercive system that gave Socrates access to this conversation. Theodote's charm and wit are praised. Her lack of alternatives is invisible. This philosophical blindness had practical consequences. Because Athens' greatest minds treated sexual slavery as natural or inevitable, they never developed ethical frameworks that could challenge it. Concepts like human dignity, bodily autonomy, and universal rights ideas that would eventually emerge in later civilizations had no foothold in classical Athens because the axioms of Greek philosophy excluded half the population from moral consideration. You cannot build an ethics of universal human worth in a society where humans are legally divided into those who possess worth and those who exist to serve it. The most haunting artifact of this system isn't a text or monument. It's a mass grave discovered in 1993 near Piraeus. Archaeologists uncovered over 200 bodies, mostly women, buried without ceremony. Their bones showed healed fractures, infections, spinal deformities, and pelvic trauma from repeated childbirth or abortions. More disturbing were brands, burn marks on femur bones where flesh had been seared. Carbon dating placed the burials between 450 and 350 BCE, Athens' golden age, while the Parthenon rose and Socrates taught. These women paid for that glory. Their disposal was its conclusion. Their story forces a question. Can we celebrate civilization when it rests on atrocity? Can wisdom remain when it coexists with cruelty? Athens collapsed from internal contradiction. Later Greeks criticized sexual slavery. Christianity condemned it, then redirected it. Byzantine rulers closed brothels, but coercion endured. The women left nothing behind. Yet their absence speaks. Beauty and atrocity were partners. Civilizations should be judged not by what they build, but by who is crushed beneath the foundations.